In the second episode of season 22, Peter lands a job at a grocery store and Brian and Joe team up to write their own crime book. And in this video, I'll break all of this down and give you my most honest thoughts about it. So, let's dive in. The episode opens with Peter's boss announcing that the brewery will transition into being an open floor plan workspace.
As we transition to our new open floor plan, the brewery will be closed for the next 2 months for construction.
Quick side tangent here, but I really want to focus a bit more on Peter's boss. I mean, he has had many, from Mr. Weed to Angela, voiced by Carrie Fisher, who was sadly retired when she passed away, and then we got Bert and Sheila for a few seasons before they were then replaced by Preston Lloyd. You know what, I really don't know what to make of this character. I do understand the point of him in that he's a no-nonsense serious guy, but I just don't love his addition. I find him to be super dull, and even his bigger spotlight moments last season didn't warm me up to him either. In all honesty, and simply, he just hasn't made me laugh once. But I don't know, what do you guys think about him? Anyway, after this, we then cut to the clan where the guys are drinking, and as usual, the lads totally dismiss Joe when he's telling a story.
I'm at the sea.
The story is already too complicated and boring. Peter, take over.
So, naturally being peeved off, Joe then talks to Brian, who is writing at the bar, and tells him about some of his open cases at work.
You know, true crime is huge right now. You could be sitting on a gold mine.
This leads on to them eventually deciding to team up together to write a book about them. And aside from that time where Brian ran off with his wife and that early episode where Brian became a cop, these two rarely interact with each other. And I don't know why they haven't done it more, because they are a great match. They are both characters that are both being cast off for trying to express their own interests. So Joe takes Brian down to the police station where they search for an unsolved case for their book. And they settle on one about a murdered woman, but her description didn't really have that wow factor that Brian wanted for their book, so they literally changed everything about her.
We'll just change a few key details so people care. Gutierrez? Nope. Gordon.
Her ethnicity, her weight, where she's from, all in order to make the story a bit more titillating for the readers.
I'll give the fictional version of their daughter bigger boobs, like real heavy naturals.
And one thing that did get a chuckle out of me was this scene.
Brian, I'm gonna have to ask you to put down the severed limb.
I brought this from home.
I just always love those little moments where Brian actually acts like a dog. But with no real ending to their story, they decide to solve the murder themselves by talking to the victim's parents. And again, this got another laugh out of me because they are less interested in getting some closure and are far more interested in getting material for the movie adaptation of their book that they haven't even written yet.
We just need to know who did it. And between us, it'd be great if one of you did.
So after the parents quite rightly tells them to get lost, Brian finds a buried case that holds a key to a mysterious storage locker. But when they find the locker, they're met with Sarah Koenig from the Serial podcast, Keith Morrison from Dateline, and Chris Hansen from To Catch a Predator.
Warm chocolate chip cookie, anyone?
Then all of a sudden a whole bunch of other crime podcasters come out of absolute nowhere and they all fight to solve the mystery. This leads on to Joe and Brian finally realizing that they were no better than them by using a real-life tragedy for their own personal and financial gain. But Brian does admit that even though it didn't work, it was still nice to spend time with someone who believed in his writing. To which Joe responds,
Well, as someone who's never read a book, I absolutely do.
and you know what? I'm not gonna let this slide. This makes absolute zero sense. Because in the season 13 episode, The Book of Joe, he writes a book. Plus, in the last season, Joe even asks Brian to hand him a book to read.
Pass me a Michael Crichton, she's gonna be a while.
And yes, I know it is just a throwaway line and I'm probably being hugely pedantic, but to me, it's just not funny because it completely goes against what we know of Joe. And it's a little thing, but it did really bug me. I don't know about you guys. Like I mentioned before, I do like this pairing because it provided a good few jokes, but at the same time, I did feel like it was a bit underwhelming, like they could have gone a lot further with it. Like Brian is a pretentious d-bag who thinks of himself as a great writer, whereas Joe has actually written a successful book. And it was just such an odd choice to make Joe completely unknowledgeable about books.
You open a book and you see Random House. Is that something we come up with?
They could have butted heads as they tried to write the book together, and then I think they could have done more with the whole investigation bit. Like Joe's entire character is to be an experienced cop who has actual real-life detective skills. And I could just imagine this pseudo-intellectual Brian messing things up for him. And again, I did enjoy what they did together for the most part, but they could have pushed this idea just a little bit more for me. But what I did like was their comment on how crime podcasts and shows can be very exploitative. It wasn't particularly clever or a brand new take on it, but some crime podcasts have genuinely made me uncomfortable, especially the ones where the presenters joke around and make it feel very lighthearted and you feel that they've completely disassociated from the fact that they were real victims and their living family still exists. Meanwhile, the other plot of this episode finds Peter getting a job at the grocery store, but Lois sees this as her domain, as it's the one place away from her family, so she's naturally pissed that Peter works there.
You have ruined groceries for me. Get the hell out of my store, you imbecile.
There weren't many great jokes here, but the one thing I did like was Peter going overboard and turning their entire kitchen into a grocery store. And when Lois takes her medicine and gets accused of theft by security guard Chris, she has to get picked up by her daddy like a naughty little kid.
Daddy,
There are gonna be some changes around here. First off, no more lipstick.
It's just that classic dumb Family Guy humour that I love. And I have to say that I also did enjoy that little Oscar memorial segment too. Shout out Betty White. Meanwhile, Lois tries to get revenge on Peter by getting a job at his favourite place, the bar, but it doesn't quite go to plan.
Whoa, check out the turd cutter on the new chick.
Again, this doesn't produce many laughs as it was such a quick scene, but you know what? It doesn't matter at all because it was all for naught anyway, seeing as Peter was only hired because the manager thought he was mentally challenged.
But that's literally the only reason we hired you.
And when he found out he wasn't, he was fired.
Lois can come back, but you're fired. I need you to turn in your gun and badge.
Thus ending the episode with Peter flying off in his Mickey copter.
See, Disney? Nothing here but respectful synergy.
So overall, speaking quite frankly here, I just watched The Simpsons' newest episode right before this one. And maybe that was a big mistake because The Simpsons one was just so beautiful and actually made me tear up. It had great character exploration, soulful music, and really, really touching scenes. Whereas this episode was as basic as a Family Guy episode could get. And maybe watching them back to back could make this one look far worse by comparison. I just find it genuinely interesting that The Simpsons are still trying to tell new and interesting stories after 33 years, whereas Family Guy has mostly stagnated in quality. But that's not to say that I don't love Family Guy and still appreciate it, because I definitely do. I just want the show to be at its best. But I do know it's totally unfair for me to compare these two at the moment because it's still the start of the season. Anyway, if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on the newest Simpsons episode, then check out my Simpsons Theory channel where the video will be released very, very soon. Overall, this felt like a very middle of the road episode, which isn't bad by any means, but I didn't dislike it, but I just didn't love it either. There were a handful of laughs, but aside from Brian and Joe working together, it was mostly unmemorable and something that, I don't know, just didn't really feel too much about it. So overall, I give this episode 3 out of 5 stars.